Peter, can you see the slide?
Yeah, I can see the slide.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
Sorry for being a little late. I had to do a few little things. So thank you very much. Well, colleague lecturers and then dear graduate students, I'm happy you're around today, Tuesday, because normally we have our workshop on Tuesdays. I'm happy that you have developed the desire to be part and parcel of this. IRIS is doing this not just because we think it's something that needs to be done, but we think that this is something that will build the capacity, and resourcefulness of our graduate students, so that we have more graduate students completing with excellent, thesis work and excellent research. We believe in you that if you adhere to all the instructions and the workshops and activities that we presenting to you, you will gain so much, to enable you to do your studies with a little bit of ease. So today we have one of us, again, a seasoned person who's done a lot of research in other areas, and is being the head of the National Council, the Basic Education Research Department of the IRIS, and for some time, and has led a number of research work in the institute. I think that you have a very fruitful interaction with him. It's going to deal, this topic will be on fieldwork. How do you go into the fieldwork? How do I prepare to go to the fieldwork? And what kind of data am I going to collect? How do I, analyze the data I collect? What kind of data am I collecting in the first place? And how do I analyze them, and then write about them? Dr. Emmanuel Tamanja is going to lead us in this. And I hope that you will once again jot down your questions and then present them at the end of the presentation so that we can have a fruitful interaction. So I introduce to you, Dr. Emmanuel Tamanja. I'm sure Peter is going to say something more about him. So I'll leave that to Peter. Peter,
Yes, Prof.
Good. Yeah.
Yes. So we have Dr. Emmanuel Makabu Jagre Tamanja. As Prof has said, is a senior research fellow at the National Center for Research into Basic Education at the Institute for Educational Research and Innovation Studies in the UEW here. He has experience in working on projects, a lot of projects that are both qualitative and quantitative. And he has been a questionnaire administrator for Commonwealth Secretariat in 2017. He has more than 12 years experience in research and teaching at all levels of education in Ghana, which makes him very conversant with the educational terrain in the country. Also, he has experience in evaluation of projects and programs in education. He is a development planning expert and has recently been a co-investigator to the university governance and community relations in Ghana. He has earlier on been engaged in some other research activities involving teacher motivation in the teaching profession. And he was an independent researcher with a group of team members who evaluated the perception of principals of colleges of education on the TTEL program. With all this wealth of experience and fieldwork interactions, we believe that Dr. Tamanja can share his experience with us as we prepare to embark on this research journey. So we introduce to you Dr. Emmanuel Makabu Jagre Tamanja to begin his presentation. Doug.
Yes, Peter.
Yes, so your presentation outline is fieldwork, preparing for fieldwork, doing fieldwork, and then post-fieldwork issues. If you are ready, your audience are listening. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Peter, and thanks so much, Prof, for the introduction. I am not sure I am new on this program, or this voice is new.
Yes, he's the principal coordinator of this program.
Yes, Prof has said, but today, in fact, we will be having separate sessions for analyzing both qualitative and quantitative data. So today is just to share our experiences with colleagues on fieldwork. We will not analyze data here. The data analysis will come separately. So thank you everyone and welcome on board today's session. So we will look basically at data because when we go to the field, it is data that we go to collect. So we'll look at data, we'll look at the types of data, then we'll look at the stages of data collection or field work. That is a preparation to get to the field, be on the field, and then what happens after we have left the field, collecting our data. So basically, research for whatever purposes that we do requires data. And we need data because we need to interrogate the data to understand the phenomena that we are studying. And so we can obtain data for research from various sources, whether we are doing desk review or we go to the field and we are measuring distances, we are measuring weights or whatever. There are different sources that we can obtain data. But whatever type of data or form that we choose to collect, we require some necessary understanding of the data, the purpose for which we collect the data, and how we will collect the data, and possibly how we will analyze the data, even before we set foot to the field. So what then is data? I know we have looked at this in some of the sessions, but just to remind ourselves that in research, data is information that we collect to help the researcher understand and to answer the questions for which the research is set to answer. Because every research is driven by some questions. And so we collect data to help us understand and to answer those questions. This information can be obtained by talking with people in the form of interviews, by observing our surroundings, by archives or from archives, from artifacts, from viewing videos, listening to audios, or measuring on the field, in the laboratories, or keeping people's diaries. So let me just give an example. For instance, if I were going to write the biography of the late President John Rawlings, one way by which I will get a lot of data is if he keeps a diary, or if he kept a diary and he recorded his daily or regular activities and things that he thought about in his diary. The diary will be a very good source of data for me of the person that I am looking at. So in collecting data, it can come from different sources, depending on the questions that we need to answer. So because of that, we can have different types of data. If I were going to do a study on, let's say, performance of children in basic or secondary education in Ghana, we know that there is one popular data source in the Ministry of Education, which is the EMIS data. EMIS data is collected by the ministry from schools, and that data is processed, and it tells us about enrollment, it tells us about performance, it tells us about teachers, the number of teachers, the teacher-pupil ratio, and all kinds of things. That data has been processed. And so if I go for that kind of data to establish the background for which I am going to conduct this research, then that source of data that I have taken is secondary data, because it has been collected by some group or an organization and has been processed. So I just go and pick that data and use it for the purpose for which I want to use and to make a case in my research. But there is another type of data that data is not available. Yes, I must have gotten the national picture, the regional or the district picture of enrollment or performance of schools, secondary or basic, from EMIS. But in the research that I want to do, I want to go to the schools and pick information about performance or about enrollment. That data is not available anywhere. So if I go to the field and pick that data becomes pure or empirical data, and I get it from first hand on the field. So if data is collected using weather questionnaire interviews at first hand, we call that kind of data empirical data. But if some person or an organization has collected the data and has processed the data, which is useful for my work, and I use that kind of data, that data is classified as secondary data. We can also classify data based on what it is that it is measured on. So for instance, if I am measuring weight or height or wind speed, temperature of a place, I can assign quantities to it and say that the temperature at the moment in Winnipeg maybe is 28 degrees Celsius. The weight of student A or student B maybe 60 kg. That kind of data, we can also classify it as quantitative data because we have assigned quantities to it. But if I were going to collect data on how wise somebody is, how honest somebody is, how stupid or creative a person is, it will be difficult for me to reduce creativity, wisdom, honesty, or stupidity to a number. And so when we are unable to do that, the data that we can observe, but may not be able to reduce it to numerical information, we usually classify that kind of data as qualitative data. Like we shared at that time, we discussed with data, we can also classify data as whether it is categorical, discrete, or continuous. And like Professor Aswa explained, when we classify responses to yes or no, or we go to study and we classify students as to male or female, it doesn't mean that if somebody is female, that person has a higher value or lower value than somebody who is male. It is just nomenclature. It is just for the purpose of classification. And so we call that kind of data, we can classify it as categorical data. If we go to a class, and for instance, I say I have a class size of 65 students, or my family is made up of, let's say, 3 members, I, my wife, and a child, or 2 or 3 children. That kind of data is discrete because you cannot have 3.5 members in a family. You cannot have half a human being. Or your class is 25.5 children. That means that cannot be something that we can easily use to do any meaningful analysis because we don't have half people. Each individual is separate and can stand on their own. And so we call that kind of data as, we classify it as discrete data. But if we are looking at the height of somebody, we are measuring distances. So the distance from maybe Winnipeg to Accra is 65 kilometers. It's just an example. In between Winnipeg and Accra, we can have different numbers. And so we can have the information in a continuum. So you can have 1 kilometer, 1.5 kilometer, 2 kilometers, 2.7 kilometers. So it is in a continuum. So when we have data that we can classify in a continuum, we say that kind of data is continuous data. I'm sure this is very elementary and basic. Now let's come to what we need to do to be able to collect data on a field. Having established what data is and the types of data that we may need for our work, it will be important for us to observe and do certain things right before we go to the field. It is very common to find students that as soon as their topic has been accepted, the next thing is that they are in a hurry and putting pressure on supervisors that they want to go to the field. They want to go to the field. But the fact is that if you rush and go to the field, what kind of data will you be collecting? Have you assessed whether the data that you are going to collect will be necessary and adequate and appropriate for the kind of analysis and the questions that you are going to answer? So it will be very important that before you go to the field, you do adequate and thorough review of literature on the topic that you want to study. And I remember Dr. Ajiman did very well on the literature review when he facilitated. So we will need to do thorough literature review on the topic. This will help us to clearly describe the concepts and the theories that we will be considering in our study. It will help us to describe the variables that we are going to collect data on. Until we are able to clearly define and describe the variables, we may not be able to collect adequate and appropriate data that we are able to run the type of analysis that we want to do. We need to also decide on the type of data that will be required to enable us run the analysis that we do in order to answer the research questions. It is important for us to consider literature review as crucial and do thorough review of our literature before we go to the field. If possible, I would want to suggest that before we go to the field, during our literature review, we develop a table by which we can link each research question or sub-question to the variables that we are going to collect data on. The type of data that we will collect on each of the variables, the sources of the data that we are going to collect, the instruments that we will use to collect the data, and the kind of analysis that we propose use. So you see clearly that this thing has to be done even at the proposal stage before you start with your data. I will share an example with you. When I was doing my PhD studies, I had some questions to answer. So this is just one of those that I decided to share so that we can look at it and see what I mean by this. So the main question that I wanted to answer under this was, how does migration influence children's access and progress in school education? Now, one of the sub-questions was, are children able to access school or study when they migrate? I was looking at the movement of children from the northern part of Ghana to urban areas, especially in Accra, and how that affects their access and progress in education. Now, to be able to answer this question, I needed to see the type of data and the variables that I was going to collect data on. So I was interested in looking at the availability of schools. The children move from villages or other parts of the country into Accra. Are there available schools for them to enroll in? Now, to be able to understand this, I needed to find the requirements for enrollment and the procedures involved. So when they migrate to the place, do they have the requirements to be able to enroll in those schools? We know that basic education in Ghana is free and compulsory. Nevertheless, we are also aware that parents and children do incur some miscellaneous costs. So the amount or the quantity of that cost could be a barrier to children's access to schooling at their destinations. I needed to look at enrollment data to see whether in actual fact the schools were congested or there was space for children who moved in there to be enrolled, and whether indeed children who migrated were able to enroll in those schools. And then whether they were studying materials, books in the schools, if they did enroll. Now, what was the source of this data that I was going to find about the availability of the schools? I needed to visit some of the premises of the schools. I needed to look at their enrollment registers as the sources of data on enrollment requirements and procedures, and whether indeed the schools were vacancies or not. If they enrolled, I needed to check their attendance registers and to look at their libraries and to see if children were indeed in those schools. So the methods that I was going to use to collect the data were interviews, where I interviewed teachers as key informants. I used questionnaire for teachers, and I observed for myself the physical presence and facilities in there. And I reviewed documents, for instance, the class attendance registers and enrollment registers. So this was a way by which I was able to match the variables, the data that I wanted to collect with the question and sources from which I was going to collect the data from, and then the methods to use or tools to use to collect the data. And so there are various tools, and each tool is maybe appropriate for a particular data source that you want to access. So it is not just enough to mention the tools, but it's important to tell which tool will be more appropriate to access which kind of data. Now, having said this, it is important for us to be reminded that research or scientific research is guided by some rules. You don't just get up and go to the field or say that you are going to conduct a research. It is guided by some rules, and we call them ethics in research. And every researcher, whether you are a student or you are an experienced researcher, you must be guided by some of those ethics. In fact, one of it is that you have to be reminded that people who take part in your research do not suffer any risk or harm, injury, or any form by taking part in your research. And this you have to establish clearly, and it has to also be certified. People who are supposed to take part in your research must agree to do so. Therefore, you need to seek the consent of people who you want to take part in your research. You need to be truthful in conducting research, so you don't deceive people to give you information, thinking that you are going to use it for research purpose, and the next moment, that information is in the public domain, and you are doing something else with it. So we don't accept deception in research. We need to be reminded that because it is not compulsory, anybody who is taking part in your research has a right to withdraw when the person feels either unsafe or feels that he or she is being deceived. So the participants in your research has a right to withdraw at any point or any stage in dealing with people's information. And so people are giving you information out of confidence that you will handle that information well. And so you need to be confidential in how you handle people's information. And even if you are putting it in the public domain, you anonymize the information that you are putting in public domain, so that people's reputations or people are not carried away by what you put out there. People support us to do research, or people volunteer to give us information. It's only appropriate that we acknowledge the support that we get from either funders of our research or people who have given us information. If I say that you should acknowledge people who have given you information, I don't mean give the individual names of those people out, but you can generally acknowledge the participants who graciously took part in your study, in your research, and gave you information. Or if an institution like the DAAD sponsors your research like they did in my research, I needed to acknowledge them for supporting me to conduct that research. So for those of us in the University of Education, the University of Education has a research ethics policy. And it is important for all researchers, whether you are a student researcher or you are an experienced researcher, to familiarize ourselves with the responsibilities of the researcher in the University of Education. So if you go to the research policy, which was developed in 2008, section 10.5 specifically talks about responsibilities of the UW researcher. And one of the responsibilities is that the researcher shall have the sole responsibility for the protection of human and non-human subjects in research. So if you are doing a study that you are collecting, whether on humans or you are in a laboratory, it is your responsibility that you protect your subjects, your participants, so that nobody suffers harm or injury for taking part in your research. So if you are doing a research that involves the use of chemicals, like in chemistry, it is your duty to protect the people who are taking part in it, so nobody is injured from any chemical or whatever that you are doing in the laboratory. If you are collecting data on a field or doing a study that affects people who volunteer to give you information, it is your responsibility to protect those people who are taking part in your study. It's also your responsibility to protect the facilities and the equipment that you use if they belong to the university. 2, as a researcher, you shall respect the privacy of people who are taking part in your research and provide confidentiality of research subjects at all times. It is not just at one point in time, but throughout your research process, you are supposed to protect their privacy and their research and their confidentiality at all times in the research process. Number 3 responsibility, if you are a UW researcher, is that you shall ensure enough participation and cooperation with all research quality assurance reviews. The university has a quality assurance review, and we have the research ethics committee. So your proposal and all that you want to do must be certified. You are supposed to submit it to the research ethics committee, who will vet it. See that what you are doing is in conformity with the university's rules and regulations guarding research. In other words, production of knowledge. So whether you are a student, you are a lecturer, you are a seasoned researcher, you need to familiarize ourselves with University of Education ethics, research ethics policy, so that we don't fall foul in the course of our studies. So it is important to assure your supervisor or whoever is going to read your proposal or take part in your research that you will anticipate and ensure good ethical practices throughout the research process. And like the policy itself says, it's not just at a point in time, but you are supposed to familiarize yourself and take cognizance of these principles or this ethics before you even start your study. That is at the proposal stage, at the beginning of your study, during data collection and analysis, and in reporting, sharing, storing, and disposal of your data. So it is also important to assure your supervisor or whoever is going to read your proposal or your research that you tell them clearly how you will process the data that you collect and how you will use the data. How and where you will collect the data and where you will store the data if you have collected it. And whether a third party, so you the person, the researcher, the one who gives you the data, whether that data will be accessible to any other person who will consider as third party or not. And if it will be accessible to any other third party, under what circumstances will somebody who is not part of the research process have access, and for what use will that data be for that kind of person? And importantly, when you collect data from people or about people, if after all that you have done, how will you dispose of that data? All those things need to be clearly established. So now that we have looked at what is expected of us, what specifically do we need to do in order to go to the field to collect data? Hello, Peter. I hope I'm clear, I'm audible enough. Okay, so before we go to the field, having established the kind of data where to collect it, we will need to develop instruments that we will use to collect data. And here, I want to focus on 3 main, very popular instruments that we use to collect data, especially for research that we are very popular, that is very popular among students and in the social sciences, where we often use the questionnaire, whether closed or open-ended items, where we conduct interviews, whether with individuals who we consider as key informants, in groups or specialized groups who we consider as focus group discussions, and then by observation. Of course, in the laboratories and in some other contexts, we may be collecting data by performing experiments and many other things. Now, if we have established and developed instruments, we will need to recruit and train people to help us collect data, especially if we are not the sole data collectors for that particular study. We will need materials to be able to go to the field to collect the data. And we will need to prepare how to enter communities and engage the community members if our data collection has to be done in communities. So, as I said, I will focus mainly on the questionnaire, the interview guides, and observation checklist. So the questionnaire, I'm sure we are familiar with that. It was invented by Sir Francis Galton in the late 1980s. And it consists of sets of questions or items that are intended to capture standardized responses from respondents. And depending on the kind of data that we want to do and the amount of literature that we have reviewed, we can have the structured questionnaire, which is made up of closed-ended items, and the unstructured, which has open-ended items. The items should be designed such that respondents are able to read, to understand, and meaningfully respond to them. So we don't encourage the use of jargons in questionnaire. We are simple and straight to the point. This is important because the questionnaire administration may be in the form of the person self-responding to the items that you have given to them. So if they are not clear, if they are not simple to understand, the person may not be able to respond appropriately. And in that instance, you may not also be around at the time that the person is responding to help that person out. So in as much as possible, the questionnaire should be simple, it should be readable, and enable the respondents to respond with or without your presence. Mean anything to him or her. Nevertheless, the questionnaire may not be appropriate or for practical use among children or with children and with people who are not literate in the language in which the questionnaire is written. So for instance, if a questionnaire is written in French and I don't read or write French, I may not be able to respond to that questionnaire. So if you develop a questionnaire in English and take it to a place where Twi, Dagari, Dabani, Ewe, and Zma is spoken, people who are not literate in English may not be able to respond to your questionnaire. Or you develop a questionnaire and take it to children, maybe at the lower primary level, when they cannot read and comprehend. It will not be appropriate to use at that level. Although the questionnaire is one of the fastest and the cheapest instruments for collecting data, especially when the population is large and diverse in geographical spread. So in developing and administering the questionnaire, we need to follow laid down ethical rules as we have looked at. And I would want to share with you some of the things that we did when we're developing questionnaire. There was a study that we did on corporal punishment in schools, in basic schools. And so as we're developing the questionnaire, we needed to assure both the teachers and then the pupils, because corporal punishment is a sensitive issue in schools. So we made an introductory statement before the questionnaire. And that statement read like, dear teacher, this questionnaire is a research exercise. All we want from you is that be truthful with your responses. We promise you that the information you give here will be confidential and will only be used for the purpose of this research. Please do not write your name on this questionnaire, and you have the right not to participate in this research. So this is just to tell you that in developing the questionnaire, we need to think about the responsibilities that we looked at, the ethical issues that we discussed, so that here we are assuring the respondent of confidentiality, and we are assuring the person that the data that they are going to give to us will be used only for this research. And they have the right to withdraw or to choose not to participate in this study. It was same for the pupils, the JHS students. And so we said, dear pupil, this questionnaire is not a school test or examination, but a research exercise. We hope that the information you give us will help us to better understand the health needs of you and your friends and youth like you in Ghana. All we want from you is that please be truthful with your answers. We promise you that the information you give here will be confidential and will only be used for the purpose of this research. Please do not write your name on this questionnaire, and you have the right not to participate in this study. So by asking them not to write their name, we are conforming with the anonymity principle. And then they have the right not to participate, and we will treat their research in confidence, their responses in confidence. So I would want to also share with you, okay, so this is a questionnaire that of a research that we did on, are you able to see it, Peter? Hello, Peter.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, we can see it.
You can see the questionnaire.
Yes, but it's not wide enough.
Yes, it's in Word. So let me try if I can.
Yeah, if you can't, I think, yeah, that's okay.
Okay. So we did a study at IRIS on the motives of student teachers pursuing teaching as a profession. And this is an example of a questionnaire that we use. And this questionnaire satisfies a number of conditions that we have looked at. So we try to put something on top there to assure them that the response that they gave will be treated in confidence and will be used only for the purpose of this research. And then because we have reviewed literature, some of the items that we did were close-ended items. Some too, we provided opportunity for them to give us, so they were open-ended items. So this is an example of a questionnaire that has both close-ended and open-ended items. So for instance, the level that they were in the university, whether level 100, level 200, or level 300, and whether they were male or female, and then their ages, because we thought of the age range within which the students should be in school. So we range people below the ages of 18 years, those between 18 and 20, 21 and 23, and then up to those above 31 years. And then the qualifications for which they were studying, whether certificate, diploma, post-diploma, or bachelor's, and whether they were already teachers or they were yet to become teachers. And so we provided some information from question, especially if your answer to question 7 is yes, then answer questions 8, 9, 10. And if no, jump to question 12. These are things that we do because if the person is not a trained teacher, some of those information, the information that we wanted from them, they wouldn't be able to provide, and there was no need. So we're looking at whether they were trained teachers, and as a trained teacher, what is your professional qualification? We got information from those things. But the ranks, we allowed them to provide us their ranks. And then before they entered college, we wanted to know their preferred profession, whether it was teaching or other profession. And we asked them to rank for us. And I'm sure you are familiar with what we did in the other presentations on scales of measurement. And then now that they are in the profession, whether they have preference for other professions, and we should rank them for us. Here we use the Likert scale to tap some constructs from them. And then we wanted to see the motives for choosing teaching as a profession, whether it is the passion for the teaching, whether it was for the love of children, and a number of them. So depending on the literature that you have reviewed, you can develop items that will help you measure some constructs that you intend to do. Nevertheless, we left room for people to give us, if there were information about them that we didn't ask for, and especially in stating the reasons why they want to become teachers, we couldn't reason for them. So we allowed them to tell us why they wanted to become teachers. And then if there was something that we didn't ask of, which they thought was important for us to know. So this is just to share with you an example of a questionnaire that we developed and used. So I go back to the slides. Oh. Okay, so Peter.
Yeah.
Are the slides back?
Yes, it's back. It's back.
Okay,
it's
so
clear.
having discussed the questionnaire, we'll look at interview guides. These are not as detailed as the questionnaire, but they are just questions and sub-questions that we want to find answers to. And so we write those questions and the sub-questions, and then we go to people who we will engage in a conversation or a discussion and who will help us understand, collect data to understand and answer our questions. So here it is flexible. You have the main question and the sub-questions, and then you engage the person who you are going to collect the data from by asking those questions, and the person responds. So this is more elaborate than the questionnaire where you restrict them to questions and responses that you have gotten from your literature review. But the questions that you have on it are meant to probe the person whom you are interviewing, so that you can cover all the variables and all aspects that the question needs to be answered. The reason is that you don't want to go and to interview somebody. Maybe you have an hour or 2 hours with somebody, and these are oftentimes very busy people, or a group of people, if in the case of a focus group discussion. And then you only to come back to the office or back to where you are and realize that you haven't collected enough data. Some of your questions, you miss out of them. So you have a guide where you will ask the person, and as the person explains, you probe that person so that you can have adequate coverage of all the items and the questions that you want to answer. One good thing about the interview guide is that, unlike the questionnaire, it is flexible on the field. You can modify it, you can add some other variables depending on how the interviews go, the information that is being generated. So the other one is the observation guide or checklist, which we need to develop before we go to the field. We can have a very structured observation, and where we'll use the observation guide. We can also have an unstructured, like if we are doing participant observation, where the person may stay in the field for a very long time, sometimes months or years. In that case, you may not need a structured checklist. The essence is to stay in the field to experience and understand why the people behave in a particular way or how they do things the way they do. This may involve also the use of optical devices, for instance, the cameras, audios, and that is especially cameras, to capture the things that you see. So I'll show you another example for us to see, especially the structured observation checklist.
Yeah, but
This is something in Word.
Zoom it a little, yeah. Oh,
Okay.
yeah, that's okay.
So this was a study that we did, and this was a classical example of an observation checklist. And this is what it was an appendix that the funders gave us, what they wanted us to do. So this is a classroom information sheet or snapshot or cover sheet. So we're looking at classroom information and what they wanted to know. So we're observing the date the date on which we're doing the observation, the day, the month, and the year, the duration of the observation, whether it was for 30 minutes, 5 minutes, 1 hour. So these are the initial information that we needed to provide or to look for. The name of school, school code, observer's name, your code, teacher's name, teacher's code, the teachers that were observing their classes. And then the time observation of that from maybe 9:30 a.m. to, let's say, 11:30 a.m., the subject that we're observing. So we're looking at the enrollment in the class, the total number of which, how many were girls, and then the students, number of students present in the class for that particular day, and wanted to know how many were girls present on that particular day, the percentage of students using textbooks, what time the class started or was supposed to begin, the time the class actually did start, and what time the class was supposed to end, and the time the class actually ended. And so there was provision for us to mention any special events or problems with coding these sheets, abnormal activities that took place in the classroom as you began the observation or you did the observation. And some of the specific things that we're looking for, the activities and the materials that we're expecting to be there or not there. The reading aloud, the number of materials or whether there were no materials, whether there were books or not, because we're looking at reading. And if there were books or not books have implications on how they were reading or were supposed to read. And whether there were notebooks, whether there was paper or pencil, whether there was chalkboard or blackboard, manipulatives, visual aids, and how children cooperated and the teacher also cooperated in the classroom. So for structured observation, everything is defined for the observer. So this one is a classic example of an observation checklist that students can develop and use. So when you go to a particular school or a place that you want to observe, it guides you and you just take or write whatever information that you want to cover from that place. Okay, are you able to see now?
Yeah, please play. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So what we just showed is an example of an observation checklist that we use to do some work. Now, so having developed our instruments, before we go to the field, it is important for us to prepare also what we need to carry along to the field. So we will need some materials, whether to print the devices if we are printing a questionnaire. And as students, you may seek assistance from the library, your department, or you can use the commercial printing devices to print whatever materials that you will need to take to the field in order to collect your data. If you are doing laboratory experiments, you will need to procure the reagents and whichever materials that you will need to be able to perform your experiments. Not only would we print the questionnaire or whatever instruments that we have developed, we will need to have some paper or some files or pens for materials for people that who may help us or people who may require of them. We will need recording devices. So for instance, if you are conducting interviews, it may not be possible for us for you to remember or write down everything that the person may be saying. So it saves time and it doesn't disrupt the interview process if you have a recording device. So as you use it, whatever discussion that takes place, it's recorded. But let us remember that before you record any conversation, an interview, you first of all seek the consent of the person that you are going to record. as we said earlier, you don't go to say that you are going to, you want someone to explain something to you as it is the reason why you are doing interviews and secretly record that person. That is a breach of confidentiality. So before you record, seek permission, seek consent that, oh, this discussion, because of the time and because I would want to remember, I want to seek your permission to record. So you need recorders if you will have to organize interviews. You may also need cameras to capture or to record videos if it is needful. But these days, that the smartphones can do many of this, performing of these functions, maybe your smartphone may be adequate for you to record, to take videos, and then to take pictures. But these are things that you have to prepare to have before you go to the field. You'll need to have devices that will store your information. So after your recordings, after you collect data using questionnaire or whatever that you are doing, or you perform laboratory experiments, where do you store that information? Are you going to store them on pen drives? Are you going to buy hard drives? So these are things that you need to decide before you think of going to the field. Going to the field involves movement. How will you move from one point to another? You need to factor in the issue of transportation. Whether you are going to provide your own transportation, you are going to use commercial transport, or whichever way that you are going to move to and from and within the field has to be prepared. As we prepare and develop a budget for the study that we are going to do, let us remember that there are always incidentals that may come our way. For instance, you may want to go to a chief's palace, and then there's protocol, or as the community observed, before you go to a chief palace, you must go with schnapp or something. You need to plan for all those things. You cannot tell how much at the beginning, but you need to have some money so that if there are some things that crop your way, you can be able to take care of that. Now, having developed your questionnaire or whatever thing that you want to do, and depending also on the scale of the study that you want to do, you may not be able to do all by yourself. So you will need the help of other people. And we often call them data collection assistants. So you will need to recruit people who will help you collect data, especially if it's the administration of questionnaire. And recruiting such people, you are mindful of their level of education or schooling. Do they understand the research process? Are they able to take independent decisions on the field when it does happen? You will need to look at the people you are sending to which language area. If there are issues of language differences, you take people who understand or can speak the language of that area. Whether the age differences and experience of the person. In fact, it's important not to engage, to consider that you engage people whose ages are not too advanced so that they can be, I'm not saying that people who are old cannot collect data, but the young ones may be able for you to instruct and to use them than the very experienced and old people. Nevertheless, whoever that you engage, we need adequate training and practice so that they are familiar with the instrument that they are going to use and the kind of data that they will collect. These are things that we will need to do. It is important for us as researchers or student researchers to know that it is not just enough to develop your questionnaire and get up, take your items and start running to the field that you want to go and collect data. You can get there and they will throw you out. So all the efforts that you would have done would have been in vain. So it is important for us to understand community entry protocols and how to engage when we are in the community. One important thing that we will have to do is to seek permission from gatekeepers. So for instance, if you are doing a study that involves using teachers or schools or pupils, you need permission. If it's a national project, you need permission from the Ministry of Education through the Ghana Education Service. So they may give you that through maybe a letter introducing you and the purpose of the research to their regional directors, district directors, and possibly to the heads of schools. If it is for NGOs that are doing some interventions in schools, you may need those letters from the NGOs that will enable the people to see that you're not just intruding at their space to collect data for clandestine purposes, but you are looking for data for academic research. To enter communities, you need to find ways of going around the community leaders for them to accept you. Whether they are chiefs, whether they are assembly members, you will find ways of which you will engage them, explain the purpose for which you are doing the research, for them to accept you before you can enter the community to do that research. It's possible to engage religious leaders, that they can be very helpful, helping you to get your people. I remember we're doing some research, and then when we got to the community, UCC specifically, the parish priest helped us a lot because he's a priest for the community there. So when we got there and we told him the purpose for which we're doing the research, he helped us. So after church service, he called people in the church and they stayed and we explained the purpose of which we wanted to do the research. And we're able to get some people who were useful, who could give us useful information to begin with. And that's how we established getting our samples from. The religious leaders are also very important in the communities that we are going to enter. Whether for at the community level or what, personal networks are also very essential to be able to enter and stay in communities. So especially if you have to enter and stay as a participant observer, how you network with the people, the leadership, the people themselves, and the people that you are going to observe is very important. So these are some of the things that you need to familiarize yourself before you go to the community. So when we are in the community, we need to observe the rules and regulations, especially if there are places that we're not too familiar with their traditions. We need to respect who they are and then have a successful stay. If we go there as academics or we go there as students and we think that we are higher than them, we may not achieve the purpose for which we are entering the community. We need to respect the rights of the participants, the people that we are interacting with. Lay down institutional structures. We need not to be obtrusive, especially when you are observing. You are not there to correct things that you feel are not right. You are just there to look at phenomena in their natural setting. So you observe as things happen. If they are dancing, if they go to fetch water, how they resolve their problems in the community. It is not your duty to intervene, but to observe what happens and just record what you see so that you can be able to have good analysis and understand why people behave in particular context. So it is important to keep a diary where you will record your daily activities, whether pleasant or unpleasant. And try to always cross-check whatever data that you get to ensure that it is relevant and adequate for you. Otherwise, you will leave the field, come and then you notice that, oh, I didn't finish. This person should have probed further for him or her to finish saying this to help me answer these questions. So depending on the nature of the data that you want to collect, we can use the questionnaire as we have already established. And the questionnaire can be administered in situ. In other words, you can go to the school, distribute the questionnaire, then they complete it and give it to you, which is very popular among students and among doing research in schools. But we also have instances where we can mail the questionnaire to the respondents. And then when they finish, they mail it back. Let me use one recent example. The just ended American elections, presidential elections. They used the mail-in ballots where information on the choices of people, perhaps between Biden and Donald Trump and other contestants, were sent to people by mail. And when they made their choices by completing the questionnaire, they mailed it back to their electoral commission. So this is one way by which you can mail questionnaire and then get responses from them. Of course, these days that coronavirus has come and some other social distancing is being emphasized. We have got an era where we use what we call the computer-assisted personal interviews, where you can have your questionnaire mailed to people that you may not even know in bulk. So on your email or your WhatsApp group, on Facebook, you may find somebody soliciting your attention to respond to a questionnaire that they have sent to you. So as you answer, the response goes to the person either at the end or immediately. These are all ways by which you can administer the questionnaire on the field. But remember that you can't compel anybody to respond to the questionnaire that you send to him or her. With regards to interviews, we could have face-to-face interview where you sit with the person and ask the person the questions and the person responds. If it is that person has a lot of information, or is an expert in that area, we often regard those ones as key informant interviews. You just introduce the topic and the person explains or tells you how and what is done. But then you are using your interview guide so that you can interrogate all the questions, the issues that you want information on, so you can have exhaust and complete information for the purpose for which you want it. We also have interviews that we can conduct on phone, where the viewer is on one side of the phone, and then the interviewee is on the other side. Then you ask the questions and the person explains or responds. Also, with developments in technology, we have Skype, Zoom, Teams, and other things that we can collect information using those facilities. These days, people go for job interviews and they don't have to go in person. They are interviewed on Skype or on Zoom. And just as we are doing, we can share information with people on Zoom, on Skype, on Google Teams, and whatever platforms. So these are ways by which we can use our interview guides that we have developed to collect data from participants. Now, observation, like I said, the participant and the non-participant observation. So the participants, you stay in the community, you experience and observe things as they happen. You don't try to change or correct anything, just observe as they happen. But with the non-participants that we have looked at using the structured interview guide, your observation guide, we use that observation guide to take and then to be able to have uniform information and whether they have adequate or inadequate facilities or whatever information that we want on the field. We have instances where you can go and take measurements on the field, looking at distances, taking up, using measuring tapes or weights or whatever you want to do. These are all things that we collect data on. So for instance, you go to the hospitals, they take your weight, they take your height. These are all measurements that they are doing. In the laboratory, you measure the length and breadth of things that you are going to use. You measure the quantities that you want to use in your experiments. There are all ways by which we measure and take information in conducting scientific research. We can test also in the cases where we want to test students or whatever that we want to do is also done. These days, we use basically theater for change or theater for data collection. We may go and perform in the community to be able to get information from the community or to change attitudes in community. So you can use that one to perform and see what it was before, and then another performance to see what happened afterwards after you've gotten the data. You can simulate situations, especially in conflict resolution. You can simulate what causes of conflict and to be able to get information to help do your research so that people simulate the situation and see how it feels like by experiencing conflict or a particular situation. In keeping a diary, it's important, especially when you are doing participant observation, that you keep the daily occurrences or activities. So when you are on the field, even when you are conducting questionnaire, institute questionnaire administration or interviews, to always record whatever has taken place, has transpired in the course of the day, so that you don't forget in the course of time. So basically, these are some of the things that we'll be doing. So for participant observation, which is mainly used in anthropology, the researcher stays in the community, take part in their daily life, observe, but the participant is not obtrusive. You just allow the community to do whatever they do. You only observe and take note of what is happening, and then you are able to understand the context within which they do and act and do things the way they do. Now, when we have collected the data and we have returned, especially if we are doing an experimental or a quasi-experimental research designs, we are using a quasi-experimental research design, and we have used the questionnaire to collect data, or we have used the observation checklist. When we come back, what we do is that, especially with the questionnaire, we input it into the software that we are going to use. And we screen the data to see if there are some gaps, and for which, whether there will be the need for us to go back to the field to fill those gaps that we have identified. And this will be done, we can see those gaps when we have inputted the data, screen it, and do some preliminary analysis, just to summarize into tables, numbers, the sample size, the summaries, and whether they are incomplete data that we have taken. In the case of gaps, if it is possible, because in the case of the questionnaire, we number all the questionnaire, and we are able to trace to who it was administered to. In some instances, you may have to trace to the field to fill the gap. But in cases where it is not possible to trace that, you can throw that particular person or that particular data that you have collected away, because it may disorganize your data. It may influence your data in a way that may not be appropriate. And that is why it is important to always have a sample size that is large enough to accommodate some of those challenges. In the case of interviews, when we return, we need to transcribe the data, whether by manual transcription or using software. Bear in mind that it is estimated that the time that you spend on an interview, if, for instance, you do 5 minutes interview, you may need 10 times that time to be able to transcribe the interview. So the transcription part of the interviews is so laborious and time consuming that we will have to be extra careful. And so we sometimes need to engage the data collection assistants, people who have the expertise of translation and transcribing. So for instance, if your study is in English, and which we do in a Ghanaian context in our schools, but your data, your interviews were conducted in Twi, in Dagbani, in Ewe, in Ga, Hausa, or whatever. When you have returned, the recorded interviews will have to be transcribed from the Twi They transcribe first from the audio to text, and then translated from the language in which the interviews were done into the language of your research. So here we are doing two things: transcribing the audio to text, and then translating from the language of the interview to the language of the research, where in our case is in English. So if you do your interviews in Chi, you first of all transcribe from the audio to Chi, and then translate from Chi to English, which can be time consuming. And that is why when you conduct so many interviews, you will have to spend a lot of time transcribing and translating before you will use that one for the analysis that you want to do. Now, in the case of laboratory experiments, for those who will be using experimental designs, the equipment that you have bought and used will have to be properly cleaned and stored or disposed of if there are things that you can dispose of, if there are reagents or other materials that you can dispose of. You have to be carefully done. But the fact that you have finished the experiment doesn't mean that you leave the laboratory in a very messy situation or condition. You need to properly clean the equipment and package them the way they are supposed to be done, and dispose of those that are disposable, and clean the place for the next experiment or the next research activity or data collection activity. So like I said, for the qualitative transcriptions that we do, when we have come back and we have done all those things, it is important for us to appreciate people who have spent their time giving us data and information. And if you have done that in a literate group of people, a non-literate group of people, you can send a thank you note to all the participants for their time and for sharing their thoughts and insights on the issue that you are investigating. And for communities that you go, maybe when you finish, you have to go back to the chief or the community leader to thank the person and tell him that, him or her, that you have stayed in the community and they have given you the necessary assistance and you have finished collecting the data, and so you want to leave. It is important to appreciate the time that they have given you before you leave. Don't live as if you have gone to commit some crime and you bolt out of or away from the community just because you have finished collecting the data. Try to maintain that rapport with the community leadership or the participants that you have engaged. You never know. Tomorrow you may have to go back there for further data or another research. It is good to maintain and keep the contacts and then the rapport with the communities that you have collected data. These days, in fact, it's an emerging trend that people, when they have come back to the office after collecting the data and analyze their data, they share the initial findings with the communities where they have gone to collect the data. This is important for three main reasons. You have stayed in the community, they have given you data, and you have come to analyze the data. Scientific research is not about something that you go and hide and do. So you go back to the community, organize seminars or meetings, and share your preliminary findings with them. This is to help you validate some of the things that you have found, because the community sees that this is what you came and this is the kind of information that they gave you. So by presenting that information to them first as your preliminary analysis helps you to validate what you have put there. It helps you to triangulate your preliminary data and also your analysis, because the people who gave you the data are themselves the first recipients of your initial analysis. So they can add or subtract things from you from the data that you have. So by doing that, it boosts also your confidence in your research that you can present this data anywhere because nobody will challenge you. The people who gave you the data have accepted it. And whatever you do and present it, you have no fear that anybody will come and say, oh, I didn't give you this kind of information, because it is something that you have presented to them and they have accepted and validated that information. So it boosts the confidence of you, the data collector, or the researcher, to be able to present anywhere in the world. Thank you so much for the time and sharing my thoughts on this issue of data collection.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Tamanja, for that lengthy experience-based presentation. And your audience will be happy to understand right from the onset through to the field work itself, and then after the field work. Prof, our chair.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
Can we listen to students' questions?
Okay, right. So today, it looks like the students have understood everything, but we have just a few of them. The first one is, please don't.
Maybe they are waiting for me to finish so they can ask.
Okay, yeah. It said, please, Doc, may I know how different the 2018 policy section 10.5 is different from the work of the Institutional Review Board? Does UEW have any institutional review board? So
yes, it is a policy. In the policy, hello.
Okay. Yeah, go on.
It is a policy document. In the policy document, there is an institutional review committee that people are supposed to send their proposals. And then also, when you develop your questionnaire, you send it to that place for them to validate, to assess and see that the questionnaire that you have developed is meant for, it satisfies all the conditions that the university has to, because when you go and carry out a study or to collect data and there's a problem, there is an institution, because you are a student of the university or you are a researcher of the university, is an institution that has the ultimate, that bears the ultimate responsibility. And so the university has put in place structures that they can guard against some of those things. So they are sure that before you go out to the field to collect data, you have satisfied all the ethical considerations that the university expects you to do before it goes. So the policy document, the 2018 one, has in it a research ethics committee where your students and researchers are supposed to send their questionnaire or their proposals to before they go out to the field.
Okay, so that was from Amos Amuriba Diki. So Amos, the university has an institutional review board that looks at especially those that require some funding. And I think that it may be necessary that we also begin to look at consent issues at the departmental level. The next question is, please, Doc, can the online interview be considered as authentic as face-to-face interview? Thank you. That is from Michael Owusu Taribi.
Whether online interviews
are as authentic as face-to-face interview.
An interview is a conversation between the researcher and the respondents. So once you establish that relationship, and depend on the online, like we are doing now, in the case of Zoom, in the case of someone, you can even see the person. So it is just that the person is not physically present. And in interviewing, it is not necessarily what you want to, what you are interested in, what the person is telling you. Of course, it is important also that as you interview somebody, you are able to look around, to observe things around the person. That is help. That's an additional data that you can collect. But it doesn't mean that, it doesn't invalidate the data that the person is giving you during that interview. It is as good as physical, face-to-face interview. But it has additional advantages because it reduces the cost of traveling to that person and then the time involved in all those kinds of things. You can do that by using the Zoom or whatever facility that you have. You can see the person if you want to see the person. You can hear the person and record the person. So as we are doing, we're also recording these presentations so that it can help. It can help us to play back in future if you want to. So online interviews are as good as face-to-face interviews, except that some of the things I can observe around that person may be missing.
All right, thank you. Cecil S. Banuku says, should transcribed piece be detailed or summarized? As should I transcribe everything said or paraphrase?
In fact, transcription has to be comprehensive. Even in the course of an interview, if the interviewee exclaims that's something that is unusual, you need to put that one as a picture as if to your questions. So in as much as possible, it should be detailed. And that's why I said that some people have estimated it takes about 10 times the time that you spend during an interview to transcribe a particular interview. So if you have conducted an interview for 5 minutes, you may have to multiply for an hour to be able to do good transcription of that 5 minutes interview.
Right. Then he comes back again. It says Professor Aswa and Dr. Adai Munukum's presentations have not been uploaded to Dr. Ephraim Koedu. Take note of this and try to upload the presentations for our dear students.
Oh, they should wait now. Follow the, it takes time to upload on the website.
Right. I think that the other concern is that you see some of those things in the course of the presentations, they may be hitches or outages. So those things you need to edit them because you put they'll be too lengthy that the students will not need some of those things that happen.
Yeah.
That is why we edit it before we put it online.
Yes.
All right. So Chachu Owulang says, can we have the email address of UEW Research Ethics Committee now here?
I think what he can do if he wants is to go to the university's website and Google for UW Ethics, Research Ethics Policy. It is not a big document. You can download it and have good understanding of it. But I cannot give the contacts online to them.
Yeah, we need to ask for permission before we can do that. But if you are a student of the University of Education, you can link up with your department and then graduate school, and you have access to the committee members. And then you can discuss whatever you have with them. Your supervisors are also there to guide you. So contact your supervisors for further information. Yes, Prof. Prof. Kola.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought you wanted to contribute.
No. Dr. Tamanja has said what I wanted to say about editing the, yes.
Okay, Lutugma Isaac says, thank you, Dr. Tamanja, for the presentation. Please, Doc, can we use multiple choice questions as a means of gathering data? If yes, will that be qualitative or quantitative?
Okay, Isaac, that's why I said that there are so many methods of data collection. You will have to choose the one that is appropriate for the data that you want to collect. What will be the reason why you want to use the multiple choice questions, question items? If it is for test purposes, it is appropriate. If you are giving the person options to take from, then the person takes what applies to that person. Remember that the questionnaire that we develop are instruments that we use to tap constructs from people. So you want to find out about something that somebody's disposition or somebody's feeling towards something, and you develop some construct, and the person ticks. So, for instance, what do I feel, or what are my opinions about a particular phenomenon or something that has happened? Do I agree with it? Do I not agree with it? These are options that you have given me to choose. So depending on the kind of construct that you want to measure, multiple choice may be appropriate. But if you have to measure some other things, for instance, the weight of somebody, you want to measure the height of somebody, multiple choice may not be appropriate. So Isaac, depending on the information that you want to measure, the data that you want to collect, the appropriate instrument has to be used.
All right, thank you. Hilia Marafa, it thanks you for the presentation and asks, are you to inform participants verbally to seek their informed consent or to give them introductory letters? Which one is more professional?
It's more professional for them to sign the consent document. In fact, the appropriate thing for them is to sign, to put a signature to it, that they have agreed to take part in this study. But what we often do, especially in schools, is because we secure introductory letters from the GES or the appropriate quarters. And so when we get to the school level, and because the students don't insist, we accept verbal consent. But the appropriate thing, the professional thing to do is to secure their written consent, which they will have to sign.
Right. Jingo, can you please highlight on data collection procedure? This is too wide.
Jingo, what aspect do you want? I think all that we have been talking about mainly data collection related issues. So specifically, what do you want, Jingo?
Okay, right. So we have,
he can also contact me personally to see if there's some area that we can have further discussion on.
Yeah. Jingo, so if you have some personal issue you want to discuss with Dr. Tamanja, you can contact him directly. Just as some other presenters have indicated, he's available to assist you. Sando, all right. So, yes, Dr. Koel Edu has sent a link to us so we can have our presentations available there. So anybody who wants to have access could quickly click on the link there, and then it will take you to where the presentation uploaded.
Peter, let me address Sando's concern.
Okay.
Sando is asking what you will do if a key informant is not cooperative.
Yes.
In fact, Sando, the reason why the person is key in generating in your data collection means that that person has some information that you will need. And non-cooperation is very common, especially in interviews. You can schedule and reschedule interview with appointment with an interviewee 3 or more times. So as a researcher, you must be patient. And that's why I said that personal network is important. Try to build a rapport with that person. And people who you engage as key informants are specialists. They have good information that you need. So if they're not cooperative, it is not that they don't want to. They just may have some challenges or some fears. But in the course of it, as you keep going, you will break through. So don't be discouraged because you have gone for the first time and the person dismisses you from the office, says, I'm too busy, I don't have time for you. Find ways by which you go about it. Use non-traditional or non-formal means of engaging that person and explaining the purpose of the research to that person. You will find a way, but there will be a way that you will get that person to cope, because the person is key, because that person has some information that is vital for your study.
So if you want to have access to the recorded so that you can watch the previous ones. All right, I think that is all the...
I think there's somebody from Halia Marifa.
Yes, there's Halia here. What do you do when the gatekeepers are not willing to meet you due to the sensitive nature of the study?
Okay. Gatekeepers not willing to cooperate with you due to the sensitive nature of the study. That is why at the proposal stage, you need to examine whether your study is feasible. And by feasibility means whether you have the capacity to be able to conduct a study, whether you will have the resources, and then whatever it takes to get data for your study. So Marifa, if it is so sensitive that the gatekeepers will not allow you to have access to their subjects, then what it means is that you haven't done enough to convince them, to explain the purpose of your study. It is because they don't trust you. That is why they think that you're sensitive and you will leak it out. But if you are going to conduct a scientific research and you explain the purpose of the research to the people and convinces them, and your supervisor also is convinced that you can get the data, then it is possible. I don't think there's anything that people will say that we will not give you information. It is because they are not too sure how you will handle their information. So you will need to convince the gatekeepers that you need that data for the purpose of research. But if it is not possible at all, that means that your research is not feasible. You have to consider studying something else. And this has to be established at the beginning of the research.
All right. So I'll now, at this juncture, hand over to the chairman to continue if he has some comments.
Okay. I've seen that Professor Kankam is around.
Oh, okay.
The Dean of Graduate Studies.
Okay,
George, are you around? Maybe or not on CTS.
Yeah.
Okay. I think once again we've got a very insightful, presentation, and I hope that I think the 40 students who are around, who are participating in this, benefited from it. Our presenter went through a series of things, talking about the types of data you're going to collect. Remember that the data will come from the variables that you have, in your study. So those variables may provide the kind of data you want, whether it is discrete, categorical, or continuous, and whether it is nominal, ordinal, or the other interval and ratio values. Yes. No. So he's taking you through all these, and I believe that this also relates to the earlier presentations. If you look at earlier presentations, some of these things cropped up. You need to learn from them. And bridge the gap. Link with the new ones that are coming. So that if you have doubts, then you raise your question. So that it can be explained to you and make you more understand, make you understand the issues better. I think that this is a very important and very good thing, because by all means you go to the field, and as he said, whether it is desktop, research or what, you are collecting data. What type of data am I collecting? Am I collecting data, for example, on temperature, which normally will be an interval ratio range, but then sometimes you collect the data and then you temperature data, and you have to categorize them, low, mid, medium, high, in an orderly form. So the data can always be converted, depending on your area of research and so on, into a categorical variable, data. So I think these are very useful things. And then one issue that I want to also mention is the getting access. I mean, he mentioned about getting access to the research sites, getting key informants and so on and so forth. It's so critical, but it also depends upon the how you select your sites, for research. If you go to a particular school, they are not interested in what you are coming to do there, even though you have permission from the GES and so on. If you are not interested, they will reluctantly let you get the data, but the data may not be genuine. You need to get a place where the individuals are ready to provide you with all the information you need. But sometimes somebody was doing a study, and then in the study, in the questionnaire that he had, he wrote that this is going to be an assessment of what is happening. The school was scared. Going to do assessment of me? No. We are not interested in assessment. So the terminology, is very, very important. If the terminology is, for example, oh, we want to just, have your views on these, on some issues that, seem to be prevalent and so on, so that, lowers their temperature and their heartbeat, and then they'll be able to give you all the information, So these are some of the things, as you go through, you learn the tricks, you learn the trade, and you learn the little things that you need to do to ensure that you get access to the kind of information you want, And I think he's done all this, in a way that, will help you, So I think that you need to take this seriously. And unfortunately, there's no examination in this. Otherwise, we will examine all of you and then find out how you are performing. But we leave it to you, because you are mature students. You are great mature people, so you know what to do. So thank you for coming, and we want to see more of your colleagues. Tell them to be part and parcel of this, because it's going to help them. At some point in time, we may have an open forum where you come with your own issues, and then there will be a panel of people who then provide you with some suggestions as to how to overcome your problems. So I wish you all the best, and then please keep safe.
I think
go along with the guidelines, the coronavirus guidelines, very, very important. Wearing nose masks, distancing, etc. So thank you very much.
I think Prof. Kankam came in. Hello, Prof. Professor Kankam. He has gone off again. Hello, Prof. Kankam.
Hi, I'm not rude. Yes, I'm not rude. I tried several times and
okay.
Oh,
the host was not allowing me to unmute.
oh,
I got that message. Yes.
hi.
Okay. So, Prof.
Yes.
Sorry.
No problem, Prof. So I sent a chat message to Dr. Tamanja that
Oh.
I can still not unmute. He was not allowing me.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
I'm sure he didn't realize that you were knocking at the door.
Yes. So thank you all. But I have been listening.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your students, any comments for them?
To my graduate students, I have said time and again that on behalf of the graduate school, we are thankful to Iris for this lecture series. And for me, I keep saying that every day is a learning process for us. These series of lectures are very insightful and thought-provoking. And I entreat all of us to commit ourselves to the series of lectures because it will obviously lead us to have the competencies and the skills to help us conduct good research.
Thank you very
Hello.
much, Prof.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much also.
Yes. So we have finally come to the end of another interesting and exciting experience-based presentation by Dr. Tamanja. And I think you have heard from our chair, Professor Anna Momensan, our Dean of Graduate School, who loves you and feels that you should always participate. You try and inform your colleagues to join at the right time next week. So all of you are entreated to visit the Invest website for the second or the next part of our presentations. And I wish to thank everybody for participating and hope that the good Lord will bless all of us. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.